I've watched multiple multi-million-dollar startups collapse, not because they couldn't build, but because they couldn't decide. And in building software, the difference between a good engineer and a great engineer is that a great engineer knows when not to build. You can't out-hustle a bad process. So today I want to take you through my engineering process, what I take clients through, taking an idea and how to break it down and deliver it into a user's hands, and really how to deliver value faster. Generally, the first thing I do is I take them through a breakdown of how to think through different projects. Something that I see a lot of founders and startups get caught up in is they've created a pitch deck or they've created some kind of offering that they've promised people before they've even validated if that's actually what solves a problem, if that's actually what people are going to use, or even if they can actually deliver upon that promise. They've left no flexibility in case something doesn't go according to plan, or if things take longer than they should, like they tend to do. And a lot of startup environments end up just firefighting and ends up in a very reactive culture that ends up either burning out the team or ends up where they just become very apathetic. When everything is important and urgent, then nothing is. And ultimately it creates a culture where people confuse motion with momentum and they start prioritizing output over the outcome. Most people forget to realize that focus is actually a feature. And when you're trying to figure out how to find the best product market fit, ego becomes extremely expensive. So I've got 5 steps to take people through in order to take them from a grand idea that they have and shape it down all the way to something you can actually deliver. You see, an MVP, a minimum viable product, shouldn't necessarily be a suite of tools that has a whole bunch of flexibility and it solves a bunch of problems for your user. It really needs to be thought in the mindset of what is the smallest bet I can make and spend the least amount of resources to get there to validate a hypothesis. I've got this thesis, this idea of something that I think will add value or users will pay for. What is the success or failure criteria so that I know that I've hit it, so that I know that I'm on the right mark, or that I know how to shift and course correct earlier on? The shorter you can get that feedback loop, the more you can actually iterate and get out, but you need to take user feedback. Any idea starts off of an assumption, and most assumptions are flawed. You need to figure out how can you get the feedback as soon as possible to validate that you're on the right path. And with the 5-step breakdown I'm showing you in this video, you're going to know how to deliver value faster. Step 1. Ideation. Everyone starts out with a big old grand idea. They have all these things that they want to do, or these problems they want to solve. They believe there's all these various market segments that are definitely just waiting to buy your product. What they forget is majority of that is going to take months, if not years, to actually execute on. It's going to take a lot of marketing to get out there and educate people if you're doing something very new or specific. Or it's going to take time to really brand yourself and stand out for whatever your unique value proposition is compared to all of your competitors. Most people think that we have to be delivering really quickly, and that means we just need to go and get through as many ideas as possible. And that's not really the case. What I found is the more ideas you actually take on and execute on, the more balls you'll end up dropping, the more problems you'll end up having, the more things will end up in flux that always have knock-on effects. It's much better to start out and focus on 1 or 2, maybe 3 real problems that you want to solve. And you want to do a real good job at solving that unique problem for that market segment. With a great product, you'll get word of mouth, which is the best marketing and promotion you can get. So cool, we've now spent a couple of hours thinking through an idea of something someone wants to build or deliver. And now we need to go to step 2. Step 2 is where we need to shape it down, right? We need to groom it. We need to go and figure out, okay, there's all these things we want to do. How do we limit that to know that we can succeed or fail on this? How do we shorten the feedback loop? What will tell us that this will work or it will fail? The real point of this second step is to turn ideas into something concrete and measurable, something that you know if you've achieved it or you failed, something that you can make a decision on later on. Here you want to map out the dependencies. You want to start figuring out what are the main objectives of things we need to achieve or certain milestones we need to hit to make sure this was a success or a failure. You really need to focus on validating the risks and assumptions here. One of the best things you can do is try to use the method of inversion thinking. Instead of going, how can I make this so successful that we make $1 million a month? Ask yourself the question, what guarantees that this fails? You'll tend to find a lot more things that will go wrong, and if you fix the biggest one of those, most of the time it gives you the bigger chance of outcome of success. Now I hear you say, Josh, but now we have all these ideas, we've spoken about these things, we've got all these little shaped bets. The reason we call this a bet is because you as a company or a team are betting time and resources and money on this idea. You want to make sure that most people don't like to feel that they are gambling with it, but majority of the time they are. Most startups fail, and I can guarantee you, most ideas you put out there aren't going to be massively successful on the first attempt. You are going to need to put something out, get feedback, and start iterating on the process, and pivot the service to actually solve the problems that your users are really having. And the faster you're able to do that, the faster you will get to success. Now, one thing I want to point out is that most people really confuse these two stages. Most people start out with the idea and they go straight into grooming. They go straight into, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to deliver on it, this is how we're going to solve these problems. And that's what you really want to avoid doing. You want to stay in the idea phase for a fair amount of time. You want to brainstorm, you want to think it through. What are the different reasons we want to do this? Why are we doing this? Who's the market we're trying to solve? What are the problems they're really dealing with? And does the solution we're building solve that problem? Not just, oh, it's nice, it's flashy, it looks good, and that people are going to pay for. No, you want to focus on solving problems. And when you move over to the grooming or the shaping stage, that's really about refining it down and figuring out, okay, this is how we validate it and this is how we know we're right or wrong. It is that simple. And it's okay to keep bouncing between the stages. It's okay to realize in the grooming and shaping stage that actually, if this is all we're doing, it's not going to really validate, or it's not going to solve the problem we want. So we need to figure out how that actually works. Some tasks are going to take longer than others. Some tasks require more resources. Some tasks require a hell of a lot more research. But that research should really inform the next step. That research is part of the ideation stage. It's not part of executing. Your goal out of the ideation stage is to come up with a list of ideas, a list of problems for you to solve that you can assign to one owner. One person in the team needs to take that on and come back and give us the feedback. Once you've done that, then you move over into the grooming and shaping. And you say, now that we kind of know the state of the world, we're still dealing with our assumption that this is what we believe is going to happen. We believe this adds value, but you still need to prove it. So you're saying, I'm willing to take a bet. I'm willing to spend 6 weeks of my team's time delivering on this core value proposition. And this is how I know we'll succeed. But if this is the result we get, we know that we're going to mark it down as a failure and we're going to move on. The teams that fail to do this constantly land up in the sunk cost fallacy. They keep doing the same things that aren't working because they spend so much time and effort on it. They are too embarrassed or scared to change course. They're in a bit of an echo chamber. They're not accepting the reality and the feedback that they're actually getting. That if they do start course correcting, things will be easier. So cool, we've now gone through the process of thinking through our grand idea, big world picture things with the client, and you have a whole bunch of little bits, things that we are willing to spend time on, things that we believe add value, and the bits of the idea that make us know really early on if we're on the right track or not. The third stage is approvals. So you've now got all these different shaped bets and they're different sizes, require different resources. The goal now is to sit down with the relevant stakeholders and to go through every shaped bet again. We want to lock down the scope and ensure this is what we're focusing on. Any of these other things is considered out of scope. Any of these other things we're not doing right now, it will come. It can come in the future once we have approved X. Or if you want this grand idea, that's going to take too long. We can get to that, but only if we make sure that we get these validated results first. But we're only going to move on to that stage if we get the right green flags, the right feedback from users that they are using it, the right metrics that users are actually even touching this part of the site. And if we can't back it with data that it's worthwhile spending that time and those resources, then our time in reality is better spent on a different task. Now, this step is not prioritization. This step is purely approvals. You want to go through all the shaped bets in the mindset of, do I believe in this? Does it solve a problem? And can I clearly articulate who it solves the problem for? In the approval meetings, it's generally going to be major stakeholders. So it's going to be the CEO or project manager and engineering manager. I tend to run it with the engineering manager, project manager, design team, and any other relevant stakeholders. Now I want to come back to outputs of each of these stages. In the first stage, ideation, all you're really wanting to do is come out with rough lists, rough workflows or wireframes. You want to come back with research and lists of problems for people to go and investigate, figure out, research, do all that kind of stuff. In grooming and shaping, you're really wanting to refine it down. You want to start working on the PRD, the product's requirement document, or some kind of functional or technical spec, and you want to start breaking it down into just a bullet point list of the main areas we need to address, or the main tasks that we need to get to. In the approval stage, we want to confirm that the designs are all done, that we have our relevant solutions documents, whether they are technical specs, functional specs, product requirement document, or tickets in Jira or Linear. And when we sign off at this stage, the scope of what we're taking on doesn't change. And at this point, it shouldn't necessarily necessarily be, we are going to deliver ABC with these exact metrics, or we are going to deliver this very specified scope of how this works. You cannot predict the future. What's going to happen in this stage is all of these items at this point just goes to the backlog. All of these items now go through, they've been thought through well enough, they're ready for us to actually spend time and resources executing on them. The design stage, the wireframes, all of that is before. You want to make sure that you've given decent amount of effort into estimating the constraints. How much time are you willing to give it? How many people in your team are you willing to let work on that for that amount of time? In the software world, at this point, you sign it off and this is now ready for dev. The fourth stage is prioritization. It's a regular check-in or sync with your relevant stakeholders, and it's going through all of those shaped bets that you have and really just prioritizing them based on the current business goals, based on what we really need to focus on, what we're pushing this quarter, whatever. How does all these bets fit in? And this is flexible. This, you cannot predict what's coming 6 months in advance. You cannot predict what you're going to be working on 9 months from now to the day. And predicting that far in advance is a waste of time. You rather want to know what everything we want to take on is, how much effort that's going to take, how many resources, and what are the time constraints that we're willing to bet it on, right? We know that if we deliver this feature in 2 weeks, we're on the money, it works, we're budgeting, we're happy for that. But if this feature takes 2 months, that's too much, that's the cutoff. We'd rather accept that that didn't work out, call it a failure, and move on to the next idea that could hopefully make it a success. So in this example, we've gone and assigned what our list of priorities are based on the current business requirements. Businesses will change direction. They need to course correct over time. And that does mean that sometimes the tasks are going to shift around. Sometimes the priorities are going to shift around. You're going to start out where this idea here, this week, is our top priority. And in 2 or 3 weeks from now, the second priority is actually not this task anymore because something in the world has changed. It is now going to be this task. And at that point in time, we need the ability to be able to shift things around. But if you have gone and really laid out and given the exact timelines and roadmap, when you do need to course correct, it becomes near impossible because then you're always just playing catch up and it's always in crisis mode and you become a reactive culture. So now that we have prioritization, the next thing is execution. And here it comes down to focus, focus, focus. You're going to get so much more work done if you block out solid chunks of time to focus on that task and get it done, get it out the way, then get on to the next one. If you're trying to do 5 tasks at once, you're going to drop some of the balls. What ends up happening in a lot of startups, they tend to say, well, we've got many people in the team and we're able to do multiple things in parallel. And they plan things out so that it works in parallel. While Joe is doing task A, Mandy is doing task B. But what I've seen 9 out of 10 times is that they fail to plan for friction. They forget that time isn't bendable. Wasted time doesn't come back. Joe can spend a week and a half on something while Mandy's busy on a task in parallel, and they can get to a point that Mandy can't continue until Joe's completed. So Joe can complete for the second week. Mandy's now half a week behind, but she needs to be moving on to the next item. And immediately, 2 weeks in, you're already behind schedule. Whereas if there was enough time going and realizing the dependencies up front and scoping out what you really need going into the task, you could have set Mandy off on a different task that wouldn't have had that kind of conflict. Or you could look at it in a different light entirely. You could have Joe and Mandy work together on the item at the beginning so that they could get what Mandy needed first so she could actually get to a task quicker. Now, when it comes to the outputs of these stages, the prioritization stage, you're really just focusing on the next 1, 2, maybe 3 items that the team's really going to take on. You want to create your sprint or your to-do list, however you're running your team, with as clear context as possible. You want to break down the shape bet for them, and you also want to tell them the goal, the purpose of why we're doing this. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Not just saying you want to build this landing page that converts people, not just saying you want to build this feature like a dashboard on our app. You want to tell them what the goal is. I want to build a dashboard so that people on the website, people on the classified site can see analytics on the products that they upload. Sometimes you need to go into detail. Are there specific analytics you want to cater for? Other times where teams are a bit more well-oiled and they work well together, you don't need to go into that much detail because hopefully you're working in a team that they understand we're doing analytics for people that sell items on this website, so clearly the analytics should be tied in to the items they sell. You want to build a team that can think for themselves, that can go into the database and actually check what data do we keep, what analytics can we provide, what type of actions do we track or should we be tracking when people access your items on the site, so we can give more detailed and better insight into how your products are selling on our website. If you don't build a team that has that kind of mindset, no one is going to have the intuition to keep building the business forward. It is always going to come top down, and that almost always creates a culture of burnout and a revolving door when it comes to hiring. The product teams that I've been a part of that have shipped absolutely insane results in record time have been the teams that have worked well together, where it doesn't matter if you're the most junior person on the team or the most senior, your input was valid and accounted. Everyone got around the table, they spoke about the idea, they shared shaped it down into something we can measure if we succeed or fail, and then they go execute on it. And they make sure that they come back really quickly afterwards to validate that it worked or not. If it didn't work, what went wrong? Do we need to course correct? Do we need to change our direction or our tact on how we execute on it? Do we need to add some more functionality maybe? Or did we really miss the mark and actually we're on the wrong direction entirely? Because if that's the case, we can cut it now. If we can see some sign of life, we can see some benefit or value that is being created, maybe we just didn't get the offer quite right yet and we need to tweak that. Maybe it's just messaging to users. Maybe it is missing features. Maybe we need to do a mobile app version of it. But the reality is you'll never know what to course correct unless you actually measure so you can improve. And one telltale sign to know if you're on the right track or not is how you spend your time. In the stage of prioritization, you really want to make sure that as a product team, you're spending half your time on features, a quarter of your time dealing with tech debt or old trade-offs that you know about to actually go back and fix the problems before they become crises. You want about 20% of your time for things like bugs or things that pop up and come out of nowhere as you're trying to execute along your day. And the last 10% is slack. You need to understand that people are not machines. They have their own pressures, their own lives going on. And not everyone's motivated by the same team. Depending on where you are in life, you might need money. That is your focus. You don't mind working harder to get more money that month or get a bonus or an incentive. There are other times, if you've just had a kid, that time is more precious to you. I would rather work harder this week and next week to make sure I get a whole week off so I can go spend time with my family. Or I would actually sacrifice part of my salary so that I could get more time back to spend with my family. And a lot of the time, most startups are not willing to actually acknowledge where the different members of their team are and what motivates each individual member. You cannot treat everyone the same. Yes, you need to treat everyone with mutual respect, but in terms of what gets them going, in terms of how to grow them and mentor them, in terms of actually giving them a path where they feel motivated and they want to spend the extra time because they see that there is benefit, there is upside that could come in either monetary, it could come in time off, in the form of experiences to travel to conferences or be a part of new exciting projects. But way too many startups are focused on intrinsic motivators over extrinsic motivators. Way too many startups have the mindset of, well, the team must just fall in line, or this looks like value to me, so they must just accept it and that is how we add value. One of the big things I want to point out at this stage is I have not once mentioned the definition of done. One thing I've seen fail a lot of the time is very strict processes. People have a finite definition of done, as in it's in production, tested by QA, and based on the analytics, it's showing that there's less than 5% of users are getting bugs when using that feature. A lot of people don't realize that majority of the world works in these fixed processes that don't work for every single situation, and there needs to be some level of flexibility. An example, nothing related to tech. A few years ago, I had a bike accident and I was in hospital for about a week. When I went into hospital, they said before they could actually put me in the bed in the ward, they needed a urine sample. And that morning before I had the accident, I was already very dehydrated. I was on my way to work. I'd already tried to drink a couple glasses of water, but it just wasn't working. I was late and I needed to get to work. I do just want to add that speed was not a factor in the accident and I was not at fault. But the hospital had me laying on the bed in the emergency room for more than 4 hours, asking them to give them a urine sample before they could put me in the ward. And I told them, give me some water and I will. The nurses refused because on their checklist it said that they needed a urine sample before they were allowed to give me any more water or before they were allowed to put me in the ward. And arguing with them did absolutely nothing because that's the order on the checklist. That's what they were trained to do. They were just doing their job. And in that environment, if you don't do it according to the checklist, you get in trouble. So eventually, hours later, they needed to move the process along. They called the doctor and the doctor said, fine, just put him in the ward and give him a glass of water. So I got booked into the ward, I got my glass of water, I passed the urine sample and they said, leave it on the shelf in the bathroom, they'll come and collect it, which I did. And 4 days later, when I was checking out of the hospital, it was still on the same shelf. They never even checked it, they never used it. What was the point? They caused hours of frustration, hours of backlog, of stuff that could have been done, of just getting the task out of the way. But because a checklist, a predetermined checklist, a fixed process, couldn't shift and had no flexibility, it had an impact on so many different people and wasted time. That happens in everything, every day. There are those processes that just need a little bit of reasonable flexibility. That's it. And where it comes to startups and solving problems, you want to focus on having that flexibility. You don't want to go out saying, we're going to do this exact way, this is how it works, before we even know. The engineering team should know this is the goal and the problem we're trying to solve, because they might not be able to execute it on it 100%, but we can get 90% of the way there within this time constraint, and that's good enough. That means we can deliver on this shaped bet, prove the hypothesis, prove the theory that you have, or this assumption that you started off with, and at least get back to shortening the feedback loop so you can iterate and actually get to product market fit, rather than spending months and months and months wasting time time doing the wrong thing, building the wrong product for the wrong people. Now, where it comes down to execution, you need to be able to really shrink down. You need to be able to measure the tasks that you take on. You want measurable input and output. So at this stage, I still haven't gone and really shaped everything down to very definitive tasks. It's still pretty high level of this is what we're trying to do, this is the problem we're trying to solve. And in how you get the team to execute is you break the task down into as small of a problem as possible. So you take the overall task and you go, to do this task, I need to do these 5 things or these 10 things. But we need to size it. We need to know, can that fit into the time frame? At this stage, the people that are executing the task should have already been part of the conversations during grooming and approval. So they should have already sort of vetted the overall timelines. But where it comes down to execution, it is very much more on a granular level of what am I doing day to day or almost morning and afternoon kind of time frame. So where it comes down to task sizing, this is how I tend to break it up. I use t-shirt sizes. We have extra small to extra large. You want to know things broken down at least a large, which is a 2 to 3 days kind of time frame. You'll start out with a main idea and you'll break it down into a bunch of extra large tasks. And those will be broken down further into measurable tasks before it actually goes into a cycle for execution. During the prioritization phase, these tasks should already be broken down past extra large. Forget about the cycle max for now, I'll come back to that. Smaller than extra large is large. This is about 2 to 3 days. This is a mini project or something you want to build, and you should break it down into medium-sized tasks. Medium-sized tasks are about a day in effort. This is a complete task that you can build, can test, and that you can hopefully ship in the daily build, if your team does that. The point of this is really so that your team protects their time and has focused time. Something that if you're only working 6-7 hours in a day, most teams working 9 to 5 will have part of the day that they slack off. They'll have part of the days that they're more productive, other parts that their brain's getting tired and that they're low energy. But you should still be aiming to solve at least one thing a day. That no, you're not most likely going to get this entire part of the platform out in that day, but you can commit to getting this main part of the section, or you can commit to something that could take you the day. Most things should be broken down into at least a large or a medium size by the time it gets to the execution stage. And in the execution stage is where you really start breaking it down into small and extra small tasks. The small tasks are going to be something that takes about half a day, so a morning or an afternoon. And this is, fixing a small bug or a tweak or something that requires maybe an hour of investigation, an hour of fixing, deploying it, or something like that. An extra small task is something that takes less than an hour. These are tiny tweaks or a little line change there or some copy change. Or I wouldn't generally go and take these tasks and execute on them as soon as they rock up. I would batch them together. So I'd get 5-6 of those tasks together and I'd spend a morning on getting those out the way. I find that protects the focus time, then you're actually way better at executing on them. I mentioned the word spike a few times. A spike comes from more of the agile scrum days where you want to test something. There's a bit of research that needs to happen. There's a bit of investigation that you want to figure out first before you really commit time and effort to it with major resources. So what this is you go and you say, I've got this idea, I need to go and validate these 3 things, or I need to check these 3 boxes to then ensure that, yes, let's go down this path. Another name for spike could be workshop. So how do you know if you should run a spike or a workshop? It's completely valid. You should run a spike or a workshop if a problem is unclear. If the team is busy with new technology or tools that they're not familiar with, try pairing the team, someone more junior on that tool with someone more senior. If you've got multiple cross-team dependencies and you need to keep them aligned, then it's generally better to have touch points that they can connect and make sure that they keep in sync. And if the estimated effort is more than 3 days, so an Excel, right? That should be a spike of sorts. It can be an hour. It doesn't need to be absolutely massive of time. You'll see here that I have said it should be max 2 days. You don't want to spend more than 2 days going and breaking the stuff down. Then what you're dealing with is more of the ideation stage still. It's not actually ready for breaking down those tasks. You haven't necessarily focused and figured on what the idea you're trying to solve is, what the problem you're trying to solve is. But obviously you don't always need to run a spike or a workshop. If someone says, hey, there's a problem here and there's clear steps to reproduce it, and you test it yourself, you can. Maybe send it to another team member. Can they reproduce that problem with those steps? If they can, cool. We're aligned. Assign it to someone to get the task done. If it's something like a cosmetic UI change, cool. Here's the new design. Here's what we need to do. Execute. If something minor needs to change, document it. Get someone to execute on it. If something minor needs to change, like an API key or a config of some sort, or adding in some tracking or changing some of the copy, clearly articulate what do you need to change, assign it to someone to change it. And if anything is less than a day of effort, then assign it to someone who has a brain, who can think for themselves, who understands the problem you're trying to solve, and let them do their job. Get out of the way. After any of the spikes or workshops or investigations, there should always be some kind of document supporting it to say, here's what I found, here's what I tried, here's what I didn't get to, here's the risks I identified, here's recommendations I might have. You really want to compact that document. And ChatGPT is great for helping with a lot of this stuff now, obviously. Things will drag on. Tasks will always take longer than expected. Some tasks will always take longer than expected. So what do you do if a task does take longer? Well, first you need to raise attention to it. You need to speak up and say, hey, this was originally a task that was meant to take a day or 2 days, but due to this, it's taking longer. When that happens, whoever's running that cycle or that sprint really needs to think about it and say, okay, what are the knock-on effects? What was that person meant to go on to next that's going to now affect? Or what's coming next that relies on this being done by this time that it's going to affect as well? You need to be thinking in advance here. It may be that you need to split up tasks and get more resources involved. It may be that you need to adjust the scope, or it may be that you just need to escalate things because people might not be performing. Or maybe you really didn't think through it well enough and you didn't identify certain dependencies in time, in which case that shows that there's some flaw happening in the ideation and grooming stage. That maybe is something you need to add to your checklist to think through before an item goes to the approval stage. The one thing to make sure is, especially in your stand-ups, there cannot be vague updates. There can't be, oh, it's just taking longer. You need to be able to articulate, I'm still busy with it because this piece is taking longer, or because this dependency wasn't mapped out, or because I didn't actually know how to do this part. That's okay. But if you vague and say it's just taking longer because it's taking longer, you can't identify what part of the process needs work. You can't identify where certain people need some upskilling. There's nothing wrong with people saying they can't do the task. That then comes to you as a leader to go in there and say, okay, how can I help you upskill and learn what you need to do here? If that's a constant thing, then it's clear that you've hired someone in the wrong role. But you cannot expect to be hiring someone and that they know absolutely everything all the time. The world does not work that way anymore. When it comes to deliverability, one thing I like to keep, there should be something that should be shipping every day. It might not be shipping to production, but at least to developers or the testers to test the next day. You might not do a daily build, you might do a bi-weekly build or a bi-monthly build. I just want to say, to me, bi-weekly means twice a week. Bi-monthly means twice a month. Am I wrong? Because other people I've seen, they think bi-weekly means every second week and bi-monthly means every second month. I don't know. I might just be wrong on this one, but that's my understanding of it. Another thing is I want to make sure that every task has one owner and a deadline. People can work together on stuff, but you need someone specific to take ownership and accountability of that task. So cool. You now understand the process of how we think through ideas and get to execution. You understand how we size out the task. Now it comes to, how does your day-to-day look? How do we actually make sure we execute and we keep on time with these things? And that comes down to our ceremonies. So again, from the Scrum Agile world, the word of ceremonies, the regular meetings and check-ins that everyone has. So here I want to say that I like to run for about 3 weeks, where we have 2 weeks of execution and 1 week of cooldown. One thing to note here is this might end up being 4 weeks if you do about a week of ideation up front. With new teams or teams that aren't necessarily gelling well and haven't found the right way to perform as a well-oiled machine, you want to do a fair amount of planning up front before the cycle starts. So that last week of cooldown, half that week is then generally spent in kind of prepping for the next cycle. But coming in and kicking this off, this is the execution side, right? We're not going into the process of our 3-week cycle of, okay, cool, now we need to think about what we do, because then it creates an environment where, okay, we only have so much time, we need to pick something, we need to execute, and you get back into motion over momentum. You want to make sure that the ideas you work on and the value you create compounds and it creates momentum. And you will always have more ideas than you're able to execute. You will always have a backlog. And that's where it becomes important to prioritize those things so that things can move around and change as they need to, and we're focusing on the right things when we need to be. When it comes to daily, you should have a daily check-in and stand up with the team. It should be fairly short, obviously depending on your team size. I think 15 minutes should be more than enough. And really all you want to do is say what's done from yesterday, what I'm blocked on, and what I'm doing next. That's it. A lot of other updates can be managed async. A lot of other things can happen in certain threads or channels, whether you run in Discord or Slack, but a lot of companies, especially startups, end up in just meeting hell. They have a small team, but that team spends 4 or 5 hours a day in meetings. After the meetings, their brains are fried. They're not going and climbing into another 4 or 5 hours of coding or intense focus work. And if they do, the productivity or output that they create is not going to be that great. And to expect any different is moronic. Another hard rule I have here is there's no other fixed daily meeting. Things can pop up here and there. You can have certain check-ins along the week, but there's no meeting that happens every single day other than just your normal check-in stand-up. We've spoken about the day. Let's have a look at the week. So starting with the week, on Monday, I generally split out the product team and the engineering team. The product team are the members in the team that focus on the ideation, the grooming, the scoping, all that kind of thing. The engineering team is the team that focuses on output, focuses on building the items, getting it into users' hands, etc. So during the first 2 weeks, it's delivery focused. That's where we're delivering. The third week, the cool down period, is when the engineering team will join product on the ideation session. Wednesdays, I'll reserve a sync collab with the whole team, everybody in. That's where we come together for spike check-ins to check in how people are doing. We might do some grooming on Wednesdays as well. This also is to cover any kind of flow over from Monday's ideation session with product. And this is during week 1 and 2, where engineering will still be able to keep on on track with what's happening in product, even though they didn't join the product team on Monday. And then every third week, they are with the product team on Monday, and they have the full ideation session and get to give all of their input. But they will have time weekly that they are able to contribute and sync and collab on these things. Then Fridays should be more of a chilled, relaxed day of the week. It's the start of the weekend. That's where the team likely will clock off early. This I feel is a better day to have more lighthearted conversations and be more laid back. Fridays are great to have a general kind of bug workshop triage session, major things that have popped up through the week that we need to address. Also, if there's anything that did ship this week, some kind of demo. I feel that feedback keeps the team motivated, keeps the team feeling like we're constantly moving forward. The more you have those, what we shipped and what value I added or created, the more the team feels like they are contributing, the more the team feels that they have a team around them that's contributing, and they feel acknowledged, which is important. Something I have quite liked at some of the companies I've worked is that they sometimes have town halls. Generally, this happens every second Friday, and if it falls within week 3, then it's joined with some kind of retro. You're doing a retro basically once or twice a month, once every 2 or 3 cycles. I don't think it's that valid doing a retro every cycle, because then it becomes more of just a rant fest of this is what you did wrong last week that I didn't like. And doing it every 2 or 3 cycles, it happens a little less frequently, but it really allows people to come together and go, look, I didn't like how you did that there, but we shifted how things worked, and it worked much better this cycle. One of the boundaries that I have is that Monday of week 1, the whole team should be in some kind of cycle planning. The cycle planning should be done before. We should know everything that is going into the cycle. But that's kind of the final checkpoint where the team signs off saying, yes, I'm happy with this commitment for this cycle, or this is what will be considered more of a stretch goal, and this is what I'm willing to commit to. And then doing a retrospective every Friday of week 3 of the cool down to go, what worked this cycle, what didn't. Having these ceremonies, running it like this, you end up having a time investment that's broken down to around 12 to 13 hours over the course of 3 weeks, which is around 4 hours a week. This has managed to reserve 90% of time for focus time for my engineers, and it's worked exceptionally well. So basically each week, stand-ups take just under 4 hours, bug workshops is just under 2 hours, cycle planning of about an hour, although remember that only happens in the first week, retro about an hour in the last week, ideation about 2 hours in the third week, grooming is about 2 hours, so bi-weekly every second week, about an hour and a half of demos and reviews, and a town hall every second or third cycle of about an hour. That's only 10% of the time in meetings, compared to 50% of the time that I've seen, if not more, in majority of the startups that I've worked in. I do have a few rules to protect focus. I like to block Tuesdays and Thursdays, try and have no scheduled meetings, other than the stand-up, and this is very much to keep deep work focus. This is very much to keep deep focus work sessions on those days. Also, Mondays tend to be pretty meeting heavy, Wednesdays tend to be pretty meeting heavy, and Fridays tend to be pretty meeting heavy. So Tuesdays and Thursdays tend to fit in well for majority of teams. Meeting days, I like to cap meetings at 2 hours. I haven't felt that meetings longer than that have been that fruitful, or people tend to lose focus and start doing something else. And I think you should start with async first. At the start of the day, drop a plan of action for what your plans are for the day. I think that as things go, you should be communicating, most of it via text. I feel meetings should mostly be focused on decisions. It should be, okay, I've thought through this, we've discussed that, what are we doing? Where we're drawing the line in the sand so that we can actually move forward and deliver value here. And every ceremony, every meeting should have an agenda. It should have an agenda and an owner, someone driving that meeting for a specific purpose, wanting a specific outcome. Otherwise, you can't ensure that there's no drift. There will always be tangents in the conversation, but you need a way to bring it back on track so you don't waste time. Now it comes to the urgent requests protocol. So now, what happens if you've planned out your cycle and you've started executing, people are focused on what they need to be focused on, and someone contacts you saying they've got a problem. Something went wrong, there's a bug in the system, there's fire to go and fight. That's where you need an urgent request protocol. You need a way for how you handle and triage these problems. And this is how I handle it. So first, there's some kind of requester that comes in and notifies us that, hey, there's a problem. That will go to someone like the engineering manager and the project manager, that they can have a quick 15-minute chat to discuss and just triage this problem quickly. If it is a P0, it means it's critical. All right, that's like our integration with our billing partner is completely down, we can't take payments. That is something critical. That can't wait a week. That needs to be addressed immediately. So they need to go and do that. If it's not mission critical and it doesn't need to be acted upon immediately, we do need to execute on it. We need to then go and check, does it fit into our buffer? That 20% of the cycle that we've allocated specifically for handling these kind of bugs, does it go in there? If it doesn't fit into that buffer, but it is still high impact, it needs to be swapped with something in the cycle. We need to have a meeting with one of the stakeholders and say, hey, here's the problem that's arisen, here's what we think we can trade it off with, but it means that that's not getting delivered this cycle, but we are fixing this problem. And the best way to do that is to have some channel that everyone has access to, that you just announce these problems as they arrive. You say, we're swapping this task for that task, or we're adding this task to the bugs list for this cycle during the cooldown week. Or we say, hey, here's the problem that's come in, we're going to discuss it in the bug workshop. Only things that need more clarification or need a bit more of a deeper dive should go into that bug workshop. If something is very clear, like the word here is misspelt, it can go onto the backlog, someone can climb into it as soon as they can. It doesn't need to be discussed much further than that. You just need to make sure that you have someone assigned that when they've got a bit of spare time, they go and look at the bugs, not just that they wait for the third week for the cooldown before they even address it. If they can address it before that, awesome. Otherwise, we have time allocated for it. And that's it. You then drop a link to the task, you document it in your decision log, be it whatever system you use, Linear or Jira, and that's how you can protect focus with visible trade-offs that are documented in a decision log so that it's 6 months from now when you don't remember how this week went and a stakeholder says, hey, that one thing happened that time, you actually have a way to address it. You actually have the historical fact of why we made that decision. You also need to be realistic. You need to have some kind of flexibility. The rule of thumb I tend to stick to is 1 or 2 urgent swaps per cycle is tolerable. In a 2 to 3 week period, 1 or 2 things that pop up that need to be addressed immediately, that need to fit in, is normal. But if you get more than that, that's a sign that your planning process is broken. That's a sign that maybe you've taken on a bit too much, or you need to go and address a core problem and you've only been addressing the symptoms. So just wrapping up, some of the principles to stick to this method is you want to give your team agency and alignment. You want to make sure that they understand why they're solving the problems they're solving and what the value is in solving that problem, but you need to give them agency on how to execute on it. There are things that need to be flexible along the way. There are things that don't fit into an exact rigid process, and every individual task or idea that you're trying to execute on will end up having its own definition of done. You shouldn't have any task that's greater than a week. It should be broken down into smaller so that you can actually measure how those things go, or at least measure what is the expected output. What are we aiming to get as a result of spending this time? No task should be greater than a week. If it is, you need to start breaking it down into something that's more measurable in terms of the outcomes. The third principle is that the cooldown period is guaranteed. It is not optional. And the fourth is celebrate quick wins. It is so easy to be negative and to just see all the problems all the time, but it feels really good if your team is able to start shipping those really small problems, and they ship a lot of them. It feels really good to see 10 things delivered today or 20 things delivered this week that's been in the backlog for the last month. That kind of motivation gets the team riled up and goes, hey, we're actually getting there. Hey, we're adding value, and that will drive them forward. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I want to go in and break down more projects, more ideas, and actually show you how to apply this process in building something out and getting it into the real world from an idea. Do share this video with anyone you think it may be beneficial, but that's pretty much it. The secret sauce. This is how I run highly effective tech teams. Cheers.